Think about the exhilarating rush of feeling entirely in control of your destiny.
Oh, yeah. That is a very human feeling.
You know that sensation, right? Like your plans are working out, your bank account looks secure, maybe your career is moving up.
Right, and you feel like the undisputed captain of your own ship.
Yeah, it is a massive thrill. But, well, here's the thing we're looking at today. That illusion of total autonomy uh, it is comparable to the thrill of skydiving without a parachute.
Man, that is a staggering image.
Right.
But it captures the situation perfectly, I think.
Because while you are in free fall, the wind is in your face and the adrenaline is rushing.
Yeah, it feels like total unrestricted freedom. You just feel weightless.
Exactly. Wait, I mean, spot on. It is a temporary rush, though. It is
Yeah.
this fleeting sensation that completely masks an impending, disastrous collision with reality.
Because the ground is coming.
The ground is coming fast, whether you acknowledge it or not. So, welcome to Reform Thinking.
Glad to be here for this.
Today, our goal for this deep dive into the source material is, well, we are examining the doctrine of divine providence through the striking events of Daniel chapter 4.
It is such a wild chapter.
It really is. We are going straight into the historical sources to dismantle this dangerous illusion of human autonomy.
Right, and to reveal the sanity-restoring reality of God's absolute holy dominion.
And as we unpack these ancient texts, we are looking through a very specific theological lens today.
Yeah, we are grounding this analysis firmly in Reformed theology,
Right, and the historic confessions of the Protestant faith.
specifically the Westminster Confession. That is our framework here.
So when we talk about God's absolute decree over all earthly affairs, we need to clarify something. We are not talking about some cold mechanical fate.
Oh, definitely not. We are not talking about a distant clockmaker who just, wound up the universe and walked away.
No, we are looking at a vibrant, indestructible fabric orchestrated by a personal God.
Yeah, he works all things according to the counsel of his will.
Right, for his own glory and for the good of his people.
I think it is great you clarified that right off the bat.
Yeah, the idea of total divine control can sound super intimidating if you strip the personal nature of God out of it.
It really can.
But to understand the sheer shock of what happens in Daniel chapter 4, I mean, to grasp the magnitude of King Nebuchadnezzar losing his mind, we first have to recognize the historical stage.
We have to set the scene.
Yeah, what did the world look like during the Babylonian exile?
Well, we are looking at a particularly dark and terrifying era for the Jewish people.
Terrifying is probably an understatement.
Oh, for sure. They have been carried away from Jerusalem as captives.
Right.
Their temple, which was the center of their worship and national identity, has been completely destroyed.
Just leveled.
Yeah, leveled. So they are living as exiles in a foreign land, and they are staring up at an empire that seems utterly invincible.
Because Babylon was not just another city.
No, it was the center of the known world at that time.
I mean, it boasted these massive walls that historians say were thick enough to race chariots upon.
Yeah, chariots racing on the walls, it is crazy. It had the hanging gardens, towering ziggurats, all that stuff.
And those brilliant blue glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate.
Right, and a military machine that had crushed literally everything in its path.
So to the naked eye, the covenant promises God made to Israel looked completely pulverized under Babylonian boots.
Yeah, if you were the average person living there, you would look around and conclude that the gods of Babylon had definitively triumphed over the God of Israel.
Which makes the actual text of Daniel chapter 4 so fascinating.
And honestly, a bit jarring.
Yeah, I was reading through the source material, and there is this massive shift in perspective that totally caught me off guard.
The shift from third to first person, right?
Yes. The book of Daniel is mostly a narrative about Daniel and his friends, but suddenly chapter 4 reads like a royal decree written by the pagan king himself.
It switches to the first person. Nebuchadnezzar is speaking.
So why does the text do that? Is there a specific reason we are getting this story from the king's own pen?
Oh, the choice of perspective is a stroke of rhetorical brilliance.
Really? How so?
Well, this is not a private diary entry found hidden in some dusty royal archive centuries later.
Okay.
This chapter opens as an imperial decree sent out to all peoples, nations, and languages.
Oh, wow. Think about the gravity of that.
Right. The very monarch who once exalted his own majesty, the guy who conquered Jerusalem, now functions as the chief herald of God's absolute supremacy.
That is wild. God did not just defeat a proud king from afar.
No, he did not just send an opposing army to conquer Babylon. He seized the king internally.
He humbled him, broke his pride, and compelled a public confession.
A confession of divine righteousness straight from the king's own lips.
So the most feared man on earth was forced to publish an open letter to the entire globe.
Yeah, stating that the God of Israel is the true king.
That is an ancient public relations nightmare for the Babylonian Empire.
Oh, totally. But a massive encouragement for the exiles.
Right. And think about the relevance of that for you, the listener today. The original audience of Daniel needed an exile survival kit, basically.
Because they lived under a hostile culture.
Yeah, and overwhelming earthly authorities. But that is the same survival kit you need right now.
For sure. When you feel marginalized today, or when the culture around you seems entirely opposed to the Christian faith, you might feel the urge to panic.
Yeah, you might think you need some new, innovative strategy to survive all this.
But the text is saying you actually need a firm grasp on providence.
You need to know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men.
That is the anchor.
But that leads to a huge question. How did the most secure, accomplished man on earth lose his mind and his humanity in an instant?
We need to look at the anatomy of his dose.
Yeah, the scene leading up to his downfall is chilling because it is so incredibly common.
He is pacing the roof of his royal palace.
Right. Nebuchadnezzar is looking out over the massive, sprawling city of Babylon.
A city he poured massive resources into, expanding and fortifying.
And he utters the core boast of all fallen humanity.
He says, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty strength as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?"
He takes total, unadulterated credit for what God alone provided.
It is the ultimate expression of human autonomy.
It really reminds me of like a modern-day tech CEO.
Oh, that is a good comparison.
Right. Pacing the top floor of a glass skyscraper in Silicon Valley, looking down at a sprawling corporate campus.
Thinking, I built this empire with my own intellect.
Yeah. But looking at this through a reformed lens, pride is much more sinister than just having an inflated ego, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It is not just someone being a bit too confident in their management skills. It is framed as an act of high treason.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Treason.
Because pride is the creature attempting to dethrone the creator.
Yes, it is an individual preferring the man in the mirror over the glory of the Most High.
It is a literal theft of divine glory.
In Reformed theology, we understand from the Westminster Shorter Catechism that man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever.
That is our basic design.
Right. So when Nebuchadnezzar looks at his kingdom and says, I did this for my glory, he is structurally violating the purpose of his own existence.
He is rebelling against the fundamental design of the universe.
He really is.
I want to try and visualize what you are saying about human kingship and pride.
Let's hear it.
Think of Nebuchadnezzar's view of his empire like a massive, complex Jenga tower.
Okay, a Jenga tower. I like that.
He believes he is the top piece. He thinks he is elevated above everything else because of his own structural integrity and balance.
Right, he thinks his own strength holds him up there.
But he fails to realize that God is the actual table underneath the entire tower.
Oh, that is good.
If God simply removes his sustaining hand or, pulls the table away, the top piece's so-called elevation means absolutely nothing.
The whole thing crashes instantly.
And the judgment for that treason in the text is sudden and shocking.
It happens so fast.
The text says that while the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice falls from heaven and his royal authority is stripped away.
He is driven from among men to eat grass like an ox.
His body is drenched with the dew of heaven.
The text says his hair grows as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails become like bird's claws.
He literally loses his mind.
And, the condition described there is a recognized psychological phenomenon.
Oh, really? There is a name for it.
Yeah, it is sometimes referred to as bolanthropy or lycanthropy, where a human being genuinely believes they are an animal and begins to act like one.
That is terrifying.
It is. But beyond the psychological diagnosis, there is a massive theological reality here.
Which is?
The king's descent into a beast-like state proves that the concept of autonomy is a complete lie.
The very nature of his being is altered.
Right. Rejecting God's rule does not make a person freer or more noble.
It does not elevate you to a higher state of existence.
No, it strips away your distinct humanity.
So, to live without submission to the Creator is to descend into the animality of the field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Humans are unique because we are made in the image of God.
Right. Designed with the capacity to know him, worship him, and reflect his character.
So when we sever that connection through pride, we do not become gods. We become beasts.
We lose the very thing that makes us human.
We really do.
I see what you were saying. Let's go to a smartphone analogy to ground this.
Okay.
Think of human autonomy like a smartphone deciding it no longer wants to connect to a cellular network or Wi-Fi.
It just wants to operate on its own.
Yeah, it wants to be completely independent from the system it was built to operate within.
Right.
It might feel free from the network, but it has instantly lost its core function.
It cannot make calls, access data, or communicate.
It just becomes a useless, expensive block of glass. It can no longer do what it was designed to do.
That analogy holds up well.
So when Nebuchadnezzar disconnected from the reality of God's rule, his mind just shut down.
A disconnected phone loses its purpose, just as a disconnected human loses their rational faculties.
But the narrative takes a fascinating turn here.
It does, because the judgment, as severe as it was not aimless destruction.
God did not just strike Nebuchadnezzar dead on the roof of his palace.
No, he left him in that animalistic state for a specific period.
The text calls it 7 periods of time.
Right. And God's purpose in that was restoration.
Which brings up the question, how does a beast become a man again?
What does this text teach us about true sanity?
There is a very specific turning point in the text that breaks the curse.
Yes, I noticed that too when looking at the sources.
The text says, "At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me."
It is such a simple physical action, lifting his eyes.
But it changes everything.
Yeah.
And the phrasing there feels very specific. The text says his reason returned.
It does not just say he stopped eating grass.
Right. Why does the text focus on his reason returning? Is there something deeper going on in the original language?
Oh, there absolutely is. The Aramaic word used for reason there is mandanda.
Okay.
Yeah. And in this specific context, true reason is intrinsically tied to God exaltation.
So mental clarity and sanity are fully restored only when the mind is oriented back to objective reality.
Yes, and objective reality is that God is on the throne and you are not.
Acknowledging the everlasting dominion of the Most High is the very definition of sanity.
Therefore, claiming autonomy is quite literally madness.
You are living in a delusion.
You are hallucinating a reality where you are supreme, and that hallucination drives you to live in a way that contradicts your design.
So looking up to heaven was the outward physical expression of an inward spiritual submission.
That makes total sense.
And it connects perfectly to the concept of joy.
How so?
Well, God's goal in this whole severe ordeal was not just to force a reluctant concession of defeat from the king.
Right, he wasn't just bullying him into submission.
Exactly. Yeah. I do not think God wanted Nebuchadnezzar to just cross his arms, pout, and say, "Fine, you win, you have more raw power than me."
The goal was worship.
Yeah. It brings to mind a concept from C.S. Lewis regarding praise.
Oh, the bit about how we naturally praise what we enjoy.
Yes, Lewis pointed out that we naturally praise what we enjoy. We praise a good book, a beautiful sunset, a great meal.
Right.
Praise is not something God demands because he is insecure and needs validation.
No, praise completes our enjoyment of the thing itself.
Right. We do not fully enjoy a great movie until we turn to our friend and say, "That was incredible."
That is a highly perceptive connection. God humbles the proud, not just to cast them down, but to bring them to a state where they can experience true joy.
Joy and submission are permanently linked.
You cannot experience true human gladness while trying to steal God's glory.
So when Nebuchadnezzar's reason returns, the very next thing he does is bless the Most High.
He praises and honors him who lives forever.
His mind is healed, and immediately worship flows out.
He is finally experiencing the joy he was created for.
A joy that his arrogant building projects in Babylon could never provide.
He traded the illusion of control for the joy of worship.
Okay, so acknowledging that God rules everything brings sanity and joy. That is clear on a personal level for the king.
Yes, it is.
But we have to tackle the massive theological tension this raises when we look at the wider world.
Oh, the big question.
Yeah, we are talking about God's absolute providence over all things.
Right.
How do we reconcile God's absolute total control with the immense suffering and dark events in human history?
Because if God is orchestrating everything, it brings up some very difficult, unavoidable questions.
It really does. Nebuchadnezzar's final confession, though, provides the framework for how we approach this tension.
It does. After his reason returns, he states that all God's works are right and his ways are just.
In the original Aramaic, those words are kishot and din.
Kishot and din, yes.
These are rare, heavy words. They indicate perfect alignment with the ultimate standard of the universe.
And what is that ultimate standard? It is God himself.
God's actions are always perfectly consistent with his own holy, pure character.
He never acts outside of perfect righteousness.
I understand the definitions, but I have to push back here on behalf of the listener.
Sure, go ahead.
Because the practical application of this is tough.
It is very tough.
If God's providence actively ordains, limits, and directs everything, and we are explicitly saying he removes kings and sets up kings, then he is ordaining the rise of wicked, oppressive rulers.
Right.
He ordained the rise of Nero, who burned Christians in Rome.
Yes, he did.
He ordains modern dictators who cause immense suffering, famine, and war today.
It is a heavy reality to sit with.
So if we hold to this reformed view of providence, how do we avoid the conclusion that God is the author of evil?
That is the most rigorous and necessary question we can ask.
It is the elephant in the room.
It is. And the Reformed tradition provides a highly robust answer, particularly articulated in the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Right, let's look at what that says.
The confession teaches that God from all eternity did, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass.
Okay, that is the total control part.
But it immediately adds a crucial non-negotiable qualification.
Which is?
It says, he does so in such a way that God is neither the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures,
Okay.
nor is the liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established.
Let's unpack that carefully because second causes sounds a bit academic to modern ears.
Yeah, it can sound pretty dry.
How does that actually work in reality?
Think of it in terms of primary and secondary causes.
Okay, primary and secondary.
God is the primary cause of all things, but he uses secondary causes, like human choices or natural laws, to accomplish his will.
So the secondary causes act according to their own nature.
Yes, a wicked ruler acts out of his own genuine wickedness, greed, and pride. God does not force him to be evil.
But God, in his infinite wisdom, orchestrates those evil choices within immeasurably vast webs of causes and effects to achieve perfect, holy ends.
Think of the sun shining on a dead animal.
A dead animal. Okay, I am listening.
The heat of the sun causes the carcass to emit a terrible stench.
Right. It speeds up the decay.
But the sun itself is pure light and heat. It contains no foul odor.
That is a great visual.
The stench comes from the nature of the dead animal reacting to the sun.
Similarly, God's sovereign decree interacts with fallen human nature, and the resulting evil belongs entirely to the human actor.
But the sovereign direction of that event belongs to God.
That analogy helps a lot. The human actor is fully responsible for the evil they commit.
Yes, they are.
God can use a wicked ruler's evil intentions to discipline a nation, to refine his church, or to set the stage for a greater display of his grace later in history.
So going back to Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. If God allowed his human pride to just go completely unchecked forever, if he never intervened against this wicked ruler, he would actually be denying his own infinite worth?
He would be letting a lie stand unchallenged in the universe.
Precisely. God opposes the proud out of both justice and steadfast love.
He opposes them out of justice because their pride is a theft of his glory.
But he also opposes them out of love.
Right, to shock us into a wakeful reality.
If God let Nebuchadnezzar just continue in his arrogance until the day he died, Nebuchadnezzar would have perished in his delusion.
He would have died thinking he was a god.
So the judgment of the beast-like state was a severe mercy.
It broke his pride so that his mind could be restored, and he could find true life in submitting to the real king.
That brings us to a fascinating parallel.
Yes, it does.
Nebuchadnezzar's story does not just end with his personal restoration.
No, this ancient narrative acts as a shadow, pointing toward a much greater reality.
It displays God's counterintuitive method of showing mercy and sets the stage for the true king.
Let's look at the shadow of the true king in this text.
How does the king of Babylon compare to Jesus Christ?
The contrast between the king of Babylon and Jesus Christ is breathtaking when you look at their trajectories.
In Nebuchadnezzar, we see a king who grasped for glory in sinful self-assertion.
He looked at what he had, declared himself supreme, and tried to elevate himself to the place of God.
And because he grasped upward in pride, he was cast violently downward into the dirt.
Literally eating grass.
While Jesus Christ is the exact inverse of that trajectory.
The Apostle Paul lays this out beautifully in Philippians chapter 2.
Christ possessed all divine glory from eternity past. He was God.
Yet he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped or held on to for his own advantage.
Instead, he stooped downward.
He willingly took the lowest position, taking the form of a bondslave, and submitted himself to suffering on a Roman cross.
The trajectories are perfectly inverted.
The king of Babylon exalts himself and is humbled by God.
The King of Glory humbles himself, and because of that perfect submission, he is highly exalted by the Father.
God gave Christ the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow.
I want to use a different analogy here to contrast these two types of kingship.
Sure.
Because the modern world still operates on the Babylon model.
Oh, very much so.
Think about how the corporate world or the political arena works. It is a constant scramble to the top.
It is a ladder where you climb ruthlessly over everyone else.
Yeah, you step on hands and heads to elevate yourself, grabbing for power, wealth, or status.
Just clawing your way up.
But the Babylon model is flawed because when you finally get to the top, you realize the bottom of your ladder is resting on nothing but thin air.
It is completely unstable.
Right, and doomed to collapse the moment God decides your time is up.
But Christ's kingship works differently.
He climbs down into the darkest depths of human suffering, taking the lowest place possible to serve and to save.
And because of that perfect obedience, the Father takes that entire downward ladder and lifts it up to the highest heaven.
That analogy really captures the essence of Christ's incarnation and exaltation.
And we must tie this directly into the theological mechanics of what Christ accomplished on the cross.
We need to talk about propitiation and atonement.
When we look at the cross, we are looking at the ultimate, unmatched display of God's providence in history.
Hold on, let's define those terms for the listener.
Which ones?
Propitiation is a heavy theological word that does not get used in daily conversation.
Oh, right. That is a fair point.
What does that actually mean in the context of Christ's death?
Put simply, propitiation means a sacrifice that averts God's holy wrath and satisfies his perfect justice.
Okay, satisfying justice.
God's righteousness demands that the belittling of his glory be punished.
Sin is an infinite offense because it is an offense against an infinitely glorious God.
We talked earlier about pride being treason.
Treason against the King of the universe carries a massive penalty.
Atonement is the work Christ did to pay that penalty, bridging the gap between a holy God and sinful humanity.
He stood in the place of sinners, taking the punishment they deserved.
Right, so that God's wrath is satisfied and his grace can flow freely to those who believe.
So the death of Christ at the hands of wicked men like Pilate and Herod was not an accident.
Not at all.
It was not a failure of divine rule where things just spun out of control for a weekend in Jerusalem.
Far from it. The cross was the highest, most complex expression of God's sovereign rule over secondary causes.
The early church understood this perfectly.
In Acts chapter 4, they prayed, acknowledging that Herod and Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, did whatever God's hand and God's plan had predestined to take place.
They committed murder, which was evil, yet God ordained it for the salvation of the world.
The Father entrusted the kingdom to the Son, making Christ's humiliation and substitutionary death the precise mechanism for achieving the highest exaltation.
God judged sin fully in the person of Christ, maintaining his perfect justice while simultaneously showing unparalleled mercy to sinners.
That is the core of the gospel.
And grasping that reality changes everything about how we view the world today.
It moves theology from the academic realm right into the living room.
Let's talk about exile survival.
Okay, let's look at living under Providence today.
How does an ancient imperial decree about a humbled Babylonian king actually change the way you interact with your job, your government, and your daily anxieties this very week?
We need to look at the how, not just the what.
The practical applications are immensely valuable and totally alter how we function daily.
The first application for the believer today is walking in genuine humility.
If the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses, then we must absolutely reject the urge to boast.
Give me a real-world scenario for that. How does that play out on a Tuesday morning at the office?
Well, imagine you just secured a massive promotion at work.
Okay, yeah.
Or your small business finally took off after years of struggle.
The natural Babylonian instinct is to look at your bank account and say, I ground it out, I worked 80-hour weeks, I outsmarted my competitors, I built this.
But a robust belief in providence intercepts that thought.
You realize that God gave you the intellect to solve those problems.
God gave you the physical health to work those hours.
God orchestrated the market conditions that favored your business.
It kills boasting because you realize you are a recipient of grace, not a self-made titan.
As the Apostle Paul says, what do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it?
That shifts your entire posture from arrogance to gratitude.
The second application we need to unpack is holding on to confidence over fear.
Especially regarding the political climate. It is so easy to watch the news and feel a sense of rising panic.
It is incredibly easy to panic, but consider the logic here.
Okay.
If God holds the breath of the mightiest Babylonian king in his hand, if he can turn a global conqueror like Nebuchadnezzar into a beast in a fraction of a second and restore him just as fast,
Then believers do not need to panic over political developments today.
we do not need to lose our minds over hostile legislation, bizarre cultural shifts, or controversial elections.
We do not place our hope in political saviors, nor do we despair when politicians act corruptly.
Christ is currently Lord over parliaments, Supreme Courts, and voting booths.
I think we often act like history has slipped out of God's fingers when our preferred candidate loses.
We act as if God is up in heaven, wringing his hands, wondering how he's going to fix the mess.
But understanding providence means knowing the script has already been written by a good and holy author.
That leads right into the third application, choosing worship over murmuring.
This might be the hardest one.
A firm grip on providence allows believers to worship through tears.
It is the hardest one because it involves deep emotional pain.
It is one thing to trust God when you get the promotion. It is entirely different to trust him when you receive a devastating medical diagnosis
Or experience a sudden financial collapse.
or face the tragic loss of a loved one.
But the doctrine of providence means you can stand in the middle of a cemetery and still worship.
You are not faking happiness.
You are grieving, but you worship because you know that the judge of all the earth always does right.
You know his ways are Quixote and Din,
Perfectly right and just.
even when the secondary causes bring immense sorrow.
You realize that the pain is not arbitrary.
It is not a glitch in the system.
It is part of a larger, holy design that we might not fully understand until eternity.
And that brings us to the fourth application, perseverance.
How does providence help the listener keep going when life feels mundane or uselessly difficult?
The assurance that earthly thrones, governments, and hostile cultures are temporary, while Christ's reign is everlasting, gives us the fuel we need for patient obedience in dark or boring places.
You can keep doing the right thing day after day without seeing immediate, flashy results.
You can faithfully change diapers at 3:00 a.m. You can cheerfully do the dishes.
You can act with integrity at a job where your boss takes the credit.
Because you know the final outcome of history is totally secure.
Your obscure obedience is seen and valued by the king who governs the cosmos.
It's the ultimate antidote to burnout.
You are freed from the burden of trying to manage the universe.
To synthesize all of this, trusting the broad sweep of God's rule over nations means you can also trust him with the intricate details of your own individual life.
The God who manages the rise and fall of empires, who dictates the borders of nations, is the exact same God who is orchestrating the seemingly minor details of your Tuesday afternoon.
He does not just manage the macro-level events.
He is intimately involved in the micro-level details of your existence.
Which brings our conversation full circle.
True human dignity is found only when we cease trying to be supreme in our own estimation.
As long as you are trying to be the king of your own life, building your own little Babylon, you are walking toward madness.
You are fighting against reality.
True sanity, true joy, and true humanity are found when we find our satisfaction entirely in the glory of the Creator.
We were made to reflect his glory, not to steal it.
The creature finds total lasting rest only when submitted to the Creator's design.
Autonomy is a crushing burden.
Submission to a good king is freedom.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder long after the audio stops.
Think about that feeling of free fall from the beginning of our discussion.
The exhilaration of skydiving without a parachute.
We know how that ends.
The ground always wins.
So ask yourself this.
If losing the illusion of control is the absolute prerequisite for gaining true sanity and joy, what specific area of your life are you currently driving yourself mad, trying to rule on your own?
Is it your career? Your children's future? Your reputation?
That is the sobering question we all must face daily.
Where are we acting like Nebuchadnezzar on the roof?
It is a question that sticks with you. Thank you for listening to this deep examination of these sources with us on Reformed Thinking.
It has been a great discussion.
Take that question with you this week, drop the illusion of control, and we will catch you next time.